Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Castle of Heart for the Nintendo Switch. And though the inspirations for Dark Souls in its graphics and for some of its gameplay from the Castlevania series may be pretty apparent, sitting down and actually playing the game might be a bit of a surprise. Starting off in Castle of Heart, we have a pretty cookie-cutter story as far as classic action platformers are concerned, and that is that there is an evil, malevolent wizard who was demanding too much from a city, and a valiant knight finally put up a fight and had to pay the price. Having protected his one true love from a curse that rendered himself and the entire village turned to stone, as she's ripped away by the evil wizard, a single tear drops upon her love and starts his heart beating again so that he can pursue the evil wizard. However, this is no Disney fantasy, and love's true tear didn't cure all of his ills, and as such we start playing the game with a curse. Playing through all 20 levels across 4 chapters in Castle of Heart, we'll be fighting the wizard's curse that is constantly trying to petrify us. However, finding red health power-ups either scattered across the map or taken from enemies that you managed to fell along your way, you'll be able to fight back against this crippling illness. However, as the wizard is the only one who can truly reverse the curse, you will need to seek out these health power-ups, as the curse itself will chew away your HP bar until it turns you to a pile of rubble. Checkpoints spread throughout the game though will fully recharge your HP bar, but just don't take too long to get there. As a 2.5D classic action platformer, of course there is action. You're equipped with your own knight's sword, but can pick up any number of second weapons, to include swords, maces, clubs, crossbows, and even javelins, in order to increase your attack power and help you chew through the mindless spawns of mobs. And you'll definitely want to make use of any secret weapons you may find in any of the level's hidden areas, as well as any random item drops from the mobs you slay, because as the game progresses and the mobs get more and more difficult, your standard knight sword gets pretty easily outclassed. However, should the random mobs be able to deal a little more damage than you were expecting, or maybe you fall into a pit or take too much spike trap damage, you will start out at the most recent checkpoint, but without that secondary weapon you may have collected. But even if the worst happens and you lost that magical sword that you may have picked up, there are a slew of collectible consumable weapons that you can use at any point in time, as well as a couple of charged attacks that will sacrifice some of your health. However, while this will definitely spice up the combat, all the button combinations that you'll need to remember for dodging and defense, as well as using your consumable items and special moves, might be a little more trouble than it's worth. Because after all, this game is fundamentally just a slash fest, so button mashing can easily get you by. As stated before, the game is divided into 4 chapters with 5 levels each, and accordingly as we would expect, there is a boss at the end of each chapter. And while each boss may actually take a little bit more effort than crushing the random mobs, the attack patterns are pretty well forecasted, and honestly, if you go in with full HP, you're probably not going to have much trouble. Moving away from the combat, however, it's time to address the game's platforming. And the platforming in Castle of Heart is surprisingly solid, but not for the reasons you might think. There is a massive diversity in the platforming, between jumping over pits, avoiding traps, swinging from ropes, and trying to bounce off with perfect timing, collapsing and swinging platforms. And while the intensity of the platforming is definitely really high when you're starting out the game, once you start to memorize some of the actual environmental cues to tell you what types of platforms you're about to be leaping towards, a bit more muscle memory sets in that takes off a bit of the anxiety. However, one thing that you will notice immediately upon playing the game that you'll also start to get used to as you play is the jumping mechanic itself. Our main character in Castle of Heart is suffering from a curse that's trying to turn him to stone, so the jumping is unexpectedly floaty. However, the reason that I said earlier that the platforming is surprisingly solid is that this floaty jump mechanic is actually really consistent. It's not floaty unpredictable, it's just floaty unexpected. And therefore, when you actually do get a handle on the game, the platforming becomes pretty enjoyable. However, that being said, there are some areas of platforming that do still feel a little unbalanced, such as the slippery climb areas that one false move will send you back to the previous checkpoint. But then again, just like a difficult boss fight in any other game, there is the ultimate satisfaction in actually completing that area. However, if there is anything about the game that players are immediately going to notice, it's the absolutely gorgeous rendering of all of the background environments. The game's music and sound effects, though, are definitely not held at the same standard as the visuals, and you may start to notice it being a little bit repetitive if you have to replay a certain checkpoint over and over. But even getting stuck in a particular area and having to play that same area time and time again might not necessarily be a bad thing. As I've already mentioned before, there are weapons and even consumable weapon items that you can find scattered throughout and hidden throughout each level. Additionally, there are also 5 gemstones that are hidden within each level that'll actually take a lot of attention to be able to find. So sometimes getting to a bottleneck and maybe even having to try and find a new path might ultimately work out to your advantage. But regardless of how many times you get stuck at a particular platform or your combat area, the entire game's not much longer than 3 hours, so you can probably imagine that you won't get stuck anywhere for very long. And while overall this is a pretty decent short action platformer, and despite its less than stellar sound effects, as well as its somewhat floaty jump mechanic and its more button mashy brawler style combat, playing through the game from start to finish in pretty much one setting, I started to almost imagine it as a runner style platformer. Other than boss fights, combat isn't really necessary, and if you're making it to checkpoints quick enough, you can always keep your health topped off. So I guess to make a long story short, Castle of Heart is definitely a game that'll catch most players off guard. And while Castle of Heart will definitely have a hard time living up to any gamer expectations based off its Dark Souls style visual presentation, or any Castlevania reminiscent expectations of the 2D action platformer, it is actually a surprisingly decent game, especially considering that right now it's on sale for $1.49. So if you think you might want to take a chance on a somewhat short classic 2D adventure, this might be the chance to get it. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Castle of Heart on the Nintendo Switch. So if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, feel free to throw me a like or a comment to show your support. And don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indies coming out literally every single day, so there's always going to be something new to find right here. But since I can only cover about 3 games a week, if you want a heads up as to which reviews might be coming out next, you can follow us on Twitter. But anyway, this has been Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.